Hello, thank you for coming. Wonderful to see such a big, beautiful, interested, engaged crowd tonight to have this conversation with environmentalist, doctor and former Green Senator Bob Brown, and Dr. Kevin Rowe, who is Senior Curator of Mammals here at Museums Victoria and an Honorary Fellow in Biosciences at the University of Melbourne. And we're here to celebrate Earth Day and the museum's new permanent exhibition, Our Wondrous Planet. And some of the places these guys have seen are very wondrous. There are challenges besetting them as well, and we'll talk about them, but we'll also look at the work that's being done all the way up from institutions and governments right down to grassroots community action to protect and preserve them. I want to start with you, Bob. You've got a fantastic connection to wild places. Was there a moment that solidified your passion to protect them, a feeling of being in those places that made you go, they're important to me?
Oh, well, I came into my memory at Trunky Creek on the old coaching road between Bathurst and Goulburn in New South Wales, where my dad was the local constable, largely there to look after the Black Stump Hotel, as it was called. And I had a twin sister, and I remember bringing home the bunch of flowers out of the bush. It was springtime, to my mother, and her saying, you know, that's beautiful, thank you very much. But they'd have lasted longer and been even more beautiful if you'd left them where they were. I'll put them in the vase, but I never forgot that. She also took us out at night to see an aurora, and then the old police house shook one night and they thought the chimney was on fire. But this is pre-electricity, so we've got kerosene lamps and so on. But no, we all went outside. There was an earth tremor. There'd been an earthquake. And then another night said, come on, down you come. And we went down in front, and under an apricot tree was a luminescent group of fungi. And these things were just burnt into my mind, and I was fascinated and by how could this be? What a wonderful planet we live on. And I've never lost that fascination. And just being in this wonderful institution, this museum today, and seeing the terrific way in which nature is being presented in the heart of a city of 5 million people has just been uplifting. And that new installation, the forest immersion, the Giant's Forest, is astonishing. You're there up in the canopy of the forest, and you feel like you're really there. I've been up in the canopy of the forest, and it's just a remarkable representation of that. And of course, the wildlife, the wondrous aspects of this planet that's here in this marvellous institution just makes your heart sing. Our job, of course, is that we have to do much more if that's going to be there for the next generation.
We were talking before backstage about what a gift it is when you're a kid and if you're lucky enough to have parents who go, hey, look at that moth, look at this bug, look at that, that's really exciting, instead of going, ugh, you know, get it away. Kevin, what about you? Were there moments in your youth where your curiosity was sparked about the natural world that led you to where you are today?
Well, yeah, of course. I'm no Bob Brown. I'm just Kevin Rowe from California. But I grew up exposed to nature a lot, and we'd spend our summers outside of Yellowstone National Park and in Idaho. And yeah, just being able to go out and be in nature was really thrilling. I grew up in the metropolitan Southern California, south of Los Angeles, and yes, close to my mouth. And was always looking for little patches of nature. For me, as a professional, it was really as an undergraduate student at the University of California, Berkeley, where I was a psychology and molecular neurobiology major. So somewhat like Bob, I changed my career and took a class on the natural history of vertebrates that took us out into the wilds of San Francisco every weekend. And I thought, if I'm going to do science, I want to do it out of doors. And I'm very lucky to have ended up through my circuitous path of being curator of mammals here, where I've been for 15 years. paid to do science in nature. It's amazing.
Well, and you were saying to me before that you spend, 2 to 4 months of every year out in the wilds, in the forests, in Indonesia in part as well. Tell us about some of the places that you've been studying lately in Indonesia.
So I've worked in Indonesia since just before I started here, since 2010 with my colleagues from the Museum Zoologicum Bogoriense, which were formerly in the Indonesian Institute of Sciences, now in the Indonesian National Innovation and Research Agency, BRIN, and really interested in the island of Sulawesi because I'm a specialist in rodents, and particularly Australian rodents, and was interested in how they came to Australia, and the species we had and genera that we had yet to sample were concentrated on this island Sulawesi, which is the largest landmass between the Asian continental shelf and the Australian continental shelf. And so I was fortunate to go there and really trying to collect samples to describe species and place them in a phylogeny, but that work has become so much more about actually protecting the rainforests and demonstrating their value for both the people and for the wildlife that live in them.
It's a really interesting case study, isn't it? Because I understand that the Indigenous people of that region have been involved in protecting the rainforest. What are the conditions that led to that being possible?
Well, you have to understand that Sulawesi's got a lot of people. There's 20 million people on Sulawesi, and it's somewhere between the size of Victoria and New South Wales. And they live there. There are dozens and dozens of language groups on this island. The most diverse place, and my fortune follows me everywhere I go, but the first place I went and did work is a mountain called Gandang Dewata, which means God's gongs in the Mamasan people's language. So I pay my respects to the Mamasan people with whom we worked there, and we surveyed this mountain in 2011 and 2012, and the people there had a very strong cultural practice of not clearing across a certain river. And I could tell you there were twice as many species on the side of the river they didn't clear. They still used this forest. They hunted pygmy buffalo, known as Anoa, mountain Anoa. They ate rats and birds and collected herbs and medicines from the forest. They also were adept agriculturalists, using the irrigation from the mountain, where they still are, and growing corn and rice and coffee. And they just had a strong connection to the intact forest, and the elder we worked with, Papa Daoud, who was 82 at the time, has unfortunately passed away a few years ago. He would hike to the top of this mountain twice a year, and it's about a 10-day hike from his house to the top of this mountain. And so it's both a culturally and economically significant property for them. And what we discovered there was an amazing diversity of vertebrates, including some of the most extraordinary rodents the world's ever seen, including a nearly toothless rodent that's on display in Wondrous Planet. We named it Posidentomys vermidax, the few-toothed worm-destroying rat, because it has almost no teeth, only its 4 front incisors, and those are little fangs that it uses like shears to snip up earthworms, but no fewer than 4 unique genera of mammals. And all these species were known to the Mamasan people, and then through those discoveries got more attention from the Indonesian national government, and in 2016 120,000 hectares were protected as the most recent national park in Indonesia.
I mean, that's great.
So, it was the first lesson for me as an evolutionary biologist, a psychologist by training, that going and doing science and making discoveries could lead to protecting the land that the people wanted protected, that Papa Daoud had asked us to try to protect this land for future generations, and it is now.
You mentioned the kind of intersection of economics and culture, because other parts of Indonesia aren't so lucky. There are vast tracts of forest being cleared for things like palm oil and agriculture, and out of necessity. How do we make it in everybody's interest to protect more of those areas?
Well, there's not a simple answer to that. So Gandang Dewata is in the province of West Sulawesi, and where poverty line is around $45 a month for people, and around 10 to 12% of people live below poverty line, and 90% of the economy is agribusiness, and a huge proportion of that is palm oil. And so lowland rainforests, the reason we were able to see these forests because they were protected by the culture of the Mamasan people, but also because it's a really rugged mountain. Sulawesi has 11 peaks over 3,000 meters and is mountainous. But the lowland rainforests are almost completely gone. There's less than 1% left. And those have been converted to things like palm oil. And then in the southeast province, southeast peninsula of Sulawesi, 90% of the economy is nickel mining. And there people live on a poverty line of around $40 a month. So these are global economies that are opening up opportunities for people who are trying to feed their families, but they're also devastating forests that we all depend on.
I wanted to ask you quickly, Bob. You've worked in environmental advocacy and protection for a long time. How powerful is it when the fight for Indigenous rights and the fight for environmental rights come together?
Well, of course they always do, because Indigenous, well, we all come from our Indigenous forebears, and wilderness, the whole wild world, wilderness was occupied by people just 10, 20,000 years ago, and always had been, except for Antarctica, of course. So a little after Trunky Creek, my father brought home the black tracker, a young fellow from the police station, and he famously, at the Gyra Sports in northern New South Wales, jumped over a crosscut saw with the blades up at 6 feet to win a 20-pound bet at that time. And I was fascinated by this young man, but I got just over an hour or two, got an insight into how he could work out what was going through the grass and what wasn't. And I realised that he was a universe of knowledge, a university of knowledge that we had lost. We've got our science and we've got our remarkable institutes of learning, but we've almost abolished out of our brain that sensitivity with nature, and you only have to listen to Indigenous people here and around the world talking about being in country. They are part of the fabric of the planet. It's to our detriment that we don't think we are anymore, that we think we run nature, that we dominate, that we're powerful, that we can protect ourselves against it, whereas in fact we're a component. We're just one species out of 20 or 30 million, maybe more, that is on the planet. But we are in this very trying time. Kevin and I were talking about this compassion versus the greed for exploitation just a while ago, and it's the great question, not just of our time, but of all time for humanity, because we now have to make compassion work and rule, and that means compassion for our fellow creatures, as with our Indigenous confreres on this country, in this planet. And there's still 300-400 million living with nature. And also with those who are coming after us, it's so important to have that not intergenerational equity, but empathy. And if you relate to those who are coming next, as well as you relate, because we relate to those who are coming past, we get it right. But Indigenous people, that's inherent. And it's such a powerful thing. And we, in our campaigning in Tasmania for Takaina, the largest intact temperate rainforest in this country, and it's being threatened from all sides. But the campaign's twofold there. One is to protect it, but the second thing, and this is incredibly important, is to get it back to the Aboriginal people who looked after it for 40,000 at least years, and whose culture is embedded in it. And the hut sites are there, and the middens, the kitchens, the waste heaps, everything is there. And that, going back to that relationship between we human beings, well, as part of nature, not owning and directing and utilising nature as we want to, is incredibly important, because the future of our single species of mammal depends on us becoming humble again at our part in nature, rather than dominating and thinking it's an endless thing that we can keep exploiting.
when you talk about the future, but also exploitation. It makes me think of a conversation we had, Kevin, about the nickel mining that's also going on in Indonesia. Can you tell us the impacts that's having and some of the issues around that?
Well, I've had a bit of time traveling through southeast Sulawesi and experiencing these mines. So the Morowali mines are the largest mines on Sulawesi and some of the largest in Southeast Asia. And we were traveling through there with our Indonesian colleagues looking for places that needed surveys. There's many places there where we don't even know what species live there or the condition of the forests. And driving through those mines, it's hours. It's 6 hours of driving through mines, this red earth mines completely destroyed, but it's also, justified because it's fueling our EV transition. And so it was a lesson for me in how there are these trade-offs in the things we're asking from our privileged first world perspective on what we want to live our lives well, and then they impact on peoples who have little financial resources. They have great communities and connection to country, but it's creating economic opportunities, and it's creating, like a lot of the money is fueling into universities, and there is creating some habitat restoration in a province that has very little revenue. So it's both devastating, but hopefully it gets harnessed for some good.
Yeah, well, and I think, there are complex decisions, aren't there? I think about the times in Australia when anti-mining activists come into conflict with ideas around Aboriginal self-determination in areas where Aboriginal communities would like a source of income from mining, and the discussions and conversations that need to happen there.
No, I think it's pretty simple. Money will appeal to any section of any community, and the billionaires and the corporate exploiters of nature know that they'll find somebody in any community, including Indigenous communities and non-Indigenous communities, who'll take the money for their own time at the expense of nature, and it's not on.
Well, and as you say, though, Bob, if the fight for self-determination is supported, then people have more opportunities and are less vulnerable to those incursions from mining companies, aren't they?
Well, in my lifetime, 3/4 of the world's wildlife has been destroyed. And at the end of that time, the foot is on the accelerator rather than on the brake. And we're in the end days in terms of ecological systems on this planet, both in the oceans and on the land. And we absolutely owe it to the poorer people in the world to be sharing that, but we're showing no sign of it. And the arrogance of the wealthy that you just mentioned is manifest right around this planet. We are not going to make it into the future unless we learn to share, and unless we uphold our national motto of a fair go for everybody. But let's have a trade-off here. Let's take Indigenous cultural awareness and relationship with country and put it onto ourselves. And the majority of our materialist community is not going to have it. We just simply won't have it. I can say, on the other hand, working with the Palawa people in Tasmania, the incursions on the rainforest there, Hilary, just in 2020, they were going to log 3,500 hectares in the following 3 years of that rainforest, and we got in the way. And our combined campaign has been saying no, and they've managed to log 58 hectares out of that 3,500 because people got in the way. It's a two-way inspiration. The Indigenous people inspire us, and we're not just taking what the rest of the community is sitting back and allowing to happen. That's the exploitation of what's left of nature. We're not another hectare as far as I'm concerned. So little is left, and it's being destroyed so rapidly.
You might have questions that you would like to ask too. The instructions are over there on the little billboard. You can log into the Slido page. Someone's asked, in your view, what about rainforest conservation is better now than 25 years ago, Bob? What things make you hopeful?
Well, as I just said, the movement of the people, 80% of Australians want our forests, our native forests and wildlife protected. 100% of big party politicians want to keep using taxpayers' money to subsidise it to grow faster. Now, that shows you the disjuncture there is between the public feeling and the political performance in our democracy. And we've just got to change that. And part of our job, when I left the Senate, I love being in part of a representative in a representative democracy. But I wanted to get back to direct action as well. And it works. And they're bringing in laws all the time to say you can't do this, you mustn't do that, you'll be jailed if you stand in front of that tree. I have to tell you at the moment that you're speaking to a criminal. I'm appealing this, but I'm still convicted of standing in front of a forest in which swift parrots were nesting as they were bulldozing them. And what are we to do? Well, we're to stand by the laws of nature, which got us here, which made us, which give us this fantastic, as Gaudi said, all human creativity comes from the great book of nature. We've got to stop burning that book. And that means actually not just hoping it'll go out, but bringing a bucket of water to its aid. And that's what we're doing at our foundation. And I love it. Just yesterday, 2 days ago, they came in to log another coup in the Tarkina rainforest. That's the greatest temperate rainforest in our nation. There's 20 people there tonight as we're talking, sitting out as winter's coming on. It snowed all over this forest. It was a snow forest last week. Who've stopped that happening? That's citizen action. And hope must be attended with action and the knowledge we all have that we're obliged to hand our world the better off onto the future for being here, not the worse. And it's a great feeling. I haven't seen anybody who's been out there and spent nights out there, up trees, in the forest. Some have been escorted back to jail, etc. But I have not run into one who said, I regret that. So many say that's the best thing I've done in my life. So, if you've got nothing to do in the coming months, come down to the Tarkina. It's a most arresting place.
Well, I mean, Bob, you've been arrested, imprisoned, shot at, harassed, threatened. How do you fire people up with the kind of excitement and passion to save these places that can get you through those experiences?
Well, we've been looking today at this wonderful installation in Museums Victoria in Melbourne, Museums Melbourne, of the what's called the immersion, the amazing footage that was taken in the Tasmanian forests by the women who produced that film, The Giants. And when you're sitting there, it is like you're in the forest. People should come to this museum and experience and bring the kids. I've been up in those trees. I've been terrified by looking down 60, 70 metres below, and you get that same feeling in the wonderful photography that's involved there. And quite next door is this, thanks to Kevin and so many other people in this very noble institution, is the terrific experience of the panoply of nature and so many aspects of it around our planet as well as in this country. So, it's inspiring. I've come out of seeing forest being destroyed in Tasmania to seeing the presentation of the forest in the heart of this city of 5 million people, and there's something going on here. And there was a lot of young people at that film today. And all I can say is our job, my job as an older person, is to inspire those young people to have the self-confidence to stand up to the destroyers, to protect what's left of nature, and to enjoy that feeling of giving living room, at least something, to our fellow creatures and, of course, therefore, to the generations coming after us. I love it.
Another question via Slido. You mentioned citizen action and its power. How does one get involved and find places that need this action? Well, our Wondrous Planet website is full of these amazing options for advocacy and volunteering and activism. You can go platypus spotting and find things to do in your area, but I'm sure you have other ideas, Bob.
Well, there's folk here tonight from Kinglake, just north of Melbourne, and less than a couple of hours up there is fabulous forest, and it's still being marauded. And the government here promised a great forest national park, but they didn't deliver it. And that's the power of the exploiters. And that's the weakness of the politicians who can't see that we have to pass that on to future generations. So first of all, take the kids out whenever you can to the bush, to nature, to the beach, to the riverside. Leave the tablets at home. If you miss that bus, you miss it all the way down the line. But we come from nature. We are creatures of nature. We are part of nature. And to be cut off from that is not only to physically deprive yourself of the wonder of moving around through nature, but it is to cut off our soul relationship with nature. That thing that says, if you give your loved one a bunch of flowers, even with the best technology in the world, don't make it artificial flowers. You'll get a bad reaction. You give them real flowers and they know that means devotion. Now, what is it? That is our ancient, inherent relationship with nature. And so keeping nature under, and Kevin and I were talking earlier, I haven't given up doctoring. Being an environmentalist is being into preventative medicine because it's so important for all of humankind that we keep that relationship with nature, and that means keeping our fellow creatures going on this planet. And again, if I don't want to overstate that, but the riches I've seen in this institution, this great museum today, is, well, I don't think anybody in this great city should deny their children coming in to experience it time and time again. It's just fabulous. And so much of nature's lost, but so much is gained, and is on present, including a real rainforest here in the heart of Melbourne. How good is that?
Kevin, your work focuses on the resilience of ecosystems and, that idea that everything is connected. How worried, there are quite a few questions actually asking how worried we should be about climate change. How resilient are those systems and how adaptable are those species to what we're facing under the current models?
Well, I don't know what worry does, but action might do something. I think we should be very conscious that climate change has very insidious effects even on protected lands. Like we did all this work in the 70s in Victoria to establish the national parks and protect areas of diversity, and there's not much you can do when they burn to the ground more frequently than they should, or when the climate becomes unsuitable for the animals that live there. And so that's something we should be very aware of. And my job as curator, I see as in part to look back to the record we have here. As Dermot introduced, this is an institution that's been around for 172 years and counting, and our specimens, the records we have of biodiversity, go back over that period. And we are going back to the oldest specimens in the collections here to understand how our biodiversity is changing over the last 2 centuries. And I'm also driven by the motto that I got from the museum in Berkeley, where I worked before I came here, that the value of what we do will not be realized for a century or more, when the student of the future will want to know about the places where we work, because it is changing rapidly, faster than we can stop it. But part of our role here is not just the fabulous displays that you see. Less than 0.1% of our specimens are on display. There's over 15 million specimens, objects in the museum's Victoria collections here that belong to the people of Victoria. And they help us understand both our changing heritage and our changing biodiversity over the last 200 years, which have been dramatic for both our culture and our biodiversity.
So what's it like going into those forests on your field work trips? and thinking, I might discover something new, and coming back with taxonomies of, creatures people haven't listed before.
Discoveries are an amazing thrill. I mean, it's the biggest rush you can when you're especially when you're with your colleagues and your friends and the community that you're working with, and you discover something absolutely unknown to science. I mentioned the Mammals people. They helped us discover 5 new genera of mammals, and a dozen new species. They were familiar with all of those species. One of them was an amphibious mammal on Sulawesi, and they brought it to us after working with them over 2 years. And it was a species they knew as balawai, which means water rat in Mamasan language, and was completely unknown to science. So we all know about the ricali, or the Australian water rat, a species that lives from Tasmania all the way to the Moluccas of eastern Indonesia. This was a completely independent origin of an amphibious water rat on the island of Sulawesi, and known to these Mamasan people, but completely unknown to science. And
is the ricali the one that slits the cane toad and gets the poison bit out and just eats the toad?
I believe ricalis are, I'm not I can't remember exactly, but yeah, they're the ones that flip them over, eat their bellies, and do that.
Yeah.
But
I knew something the mammals guy didn't. They are badass rodents. But I mean, when you talk about resilience too, I know you've done a lot of work with the endangered smoky mouse at Garryword Grampians National Park, which was hugely affected by fires in recent years. Tell us about that, what you're seeing with that mammal.
Well, yeah, that's kind of the other side of the experiences you have sometimes, as Bob probably can relate to as well. Sometimes you do have to experience devastation firsthand. So one of the first things I did when I was a curator here was participate in a bioscan, an all taxa inventory of Grampians Garryword National Park. And one of the things we detected there was the largest population of smoky mouse, an endangered species of native mammal that hadn't been seen since the 1970s in those numbers. And then immediately after that, there was a massive fire that burned the whole area. And so we decided we would never leave, essentially, and continued monitoring the population. And really, since 2019, we've had permanent wildlife cameras monitoring the population. And then last year, as many of you may know, nearly 80% of the park burned, including almost all of the occupied habitat by smoky mice, including burning 35 of our 37 cameras. And then, so we were on the ground Valentine's Day at the top of Duwul, or Mount William. It's the highest peak in the Grampians Garryword, and that was a difficult return to a landscape I had been to many times over 10 years. And at the top of Duwul is a beautiful, natural bonsai garden of stunted snow gums and banksias, and it's just it was a remarkably beautiful place. But coming into that when it was charred to ash, it was heartbreaking, emotional, but the good news is the smoky mice are still there. I won't say they didn't seem to mind, but we have these great footage of them just on bare lunar Earth, still hopping around, looking for things. We're still trying to figure out what the impacts are going to be. They also have massive genetic diversity loss that we know from sequencing their whole genomes, which we can do now, and sequencing the whole genomes of the oldest specimens we have in our collection, which go back to 1933, and seeing that we used to have much more genetic diversity, and that has declined dramatically, really since the 1970s, to what we have today. That goes along with what Bob was saying about losing 3/4 of our wildlife. That's also evident within the remaining species because they have this real loss of genetic diversity. And genetic diversity, I know it's a kind of technical term, but it's how species evolve, how species are going to respond to this changing world, and how they have responded to a changing world over nearly 4 billion years.
Does that also speak to the importance of what you're doing, having collected that information before the disaster, so we know what we might lose?
Yeah, I mean, the state of Victoria has a monitoring ecosystem resilience program, which is a fantastic program and that we've been part of. Includes some of these smoky mouse sites, but we've surveyed around 1,800 sites across the state in the last 4 years. The latest sites, we just did 200 sites in the Little Desert following their fires. And prior to the year before the Grampians fire, we had surveyed 110 sites there. And we have a student now, I think Liam's in the room, whose work has revisited those sites. So we survey those sites with wildlife cameras, passive acoustic recorders. There's a botanical team that goes out and monitors every counts every species of plant along a 100-meter transect. And so we have this rich information on the condition of those sites just before this severe fire, and now we're trying to understand how they recover immediately after that fire and leave those records in a way that they'll still be accessible 100 years from now. So we feed into our digital database here at the museum called EMU, Electronic Museum, not the bird, and that we developed here in Melbourne and is now used globally, like by organizations like the Smithsonian and other Australian museums. And then that feeds into the Atlas of Living Australia. And so you can see our camera records on the Atlas of Living Australia. We're trying to make them all publicly available, and our next big task is to try to get this acoustic data available. We have registered around 53,000 bird records as of this week from that acoustic work, but that's only by manually listening to parts of the data. And now that we're applying machine learning algorithms, we expect that we'll have more than 1 million records of birds.
Do you need
from
volunteers?
Victoria.
Because I can see people going, I want to listen to bird calls on a daily basis.
Please, if you want to listen to 30 years of audio, we've got it for you.
There's actually a strong hunger for rodent information among the audience, apparently. People want to know what your favourite Australian rodent is. Is it the smoky mouse?
I mean, I really like Ricali. I don't really have species favorites. I mean, I think it's amazing. What's wondrous to me is that we live on a world with 10 million other species and that they all coexist and that they're the tiny fraction of all the species that have ever lived on this planet. But every single one of them alive today is equally successful in the fact that it's alive. We all share a common ancestor around 4 billion years ago, and every single cell alive today has successfully replicated itself before dying. Whether it's one of the 10 trillion cells in you, or whether it's a bacteria floating in the air here, it has replicated itself over, somewhere around 40 trillion generations successfully without dying. Whereas every generation, the vast majority of life dies before reproducing. And yet everything that's alive today is a winner, is a success story from that.
Yeah, particularly sharks.
So my
They're
favorite's
winners.
everything. My favorite is every species, but yeah.
Well, and Bob, someone's asking, what is your favourite Tassie rainforest fauna species? Do you have a favourite child?
No, I just love the lot, and they interrelate with each other. I was talking earlier about the golden brush-tailed possums we've got down the other end of the island. But up the Tassie devil, which is endangered with extinction, has got its stronghold in the Tarkine. As you very likely know, it's been decimated elsewhere by a viral transmitted cancer. It's a very rare thing in amongst the world's fauna. And it's strong in the Tarkine because the Tarkine's intact. And so one of the wonderful things is that places like McKimmy's Creek in the Tarkine, cathedral like Rainforest, that just a couple of years ago was designated to be a waste dump for a mine on the other side of the river. Over 100 people got arrested there, and we took court action and we made the authorities abide by their own laws, but it's now, the company's effectively now going somewhere else. And that forest is there for species like the Tassie devil and of course the variety of possums as well as the reptiles and the birds. So keep their habitat, you keep the fauna. That's the simple rule. So our job is to do that. Picking favourites, I don't know. I just love the whole lot of them.
I like in the film The Giants.
Yeah.
I can't remember if it's David Suzuki or the botanist from the Royal Botanic Gardens who talks about the separation of individuals is a kind of a notion that we're losing. And this is profound realization that we're not a single thing, that we're 50% of your genome is bacteria living inside you. Half of your functions are made by other organisms that are part of you, and the same for the trees and the mycorrhizal associations. I think that is like a profound realization of connectivity that Indigenous peoples are aware of, people are connected to land are aware of on a spiritual and an emotional level, but science is really opening up the idea that we're not separate. We are completely connected, and there is no one favorite to pick because
'Cause they're
species
all-
are not just individual species; they're a community in and of themselves.
There's quite a few questions here about how you spur people to action, and I feel like there's already a lot of passion in the community and an urge to protect these places. But I wondered, Bob, if you could talk about a section in The Giants that I remember where a particular image of the Franklin helped people understand what was at stake.
Yes, in 1979, I asked Peter Dombrovskis, who was the foremost wilderness photographer in Tasmania, if not on the planet at the time, if he'd go down the Franklin River, and he did that year. And he did each of a number of following years at great risk to himself with a small raft and a huge lot of photographic equipment. But I found myself after his second trip up at his house on the side of Kananyi, Mount Wellington in Hobart, looking at these pictures, and up came this picture of Rock Island Bend, and I said, Peter, that's it. I knew, he knew that we needed a campaign photographs that would translate to people who couldn't get to the Franklin something of the living spirit and beauty of that place. And this did it. And Rock Island Bend was going to be obliterated by the first dam, which was going to be the highest rock-filled dam in the southern hemisphere. So he said, but Bob, it's not my best picture. I said, it is. Peter, it is. And of course that became duplicated millions of times during the Franklin campaign. And on the Thursday before the election in March 1983, which changed governments and saved the Franklin, it ran in The Age, the Sydney Morning Herald and the Courier Mail, a big full-page colour ad saying, could you vote for a party that would destroy this? And I had 20, 30 years later, I had people in Parliament in Canberra saying, that's the most powerful political advertisement we've ever seen. But it was due to Peter going down there and just being able to portray it and bring it back and then to share it. And it was so seminal to so much the core of the campaign that saved the river. And of course imagery and artistry, artists are critical to every endeavour to saving nature. Now when we've had 100 or more out in Tarkina again in that rainforest weekend before last, I don't know if you remember, it was very cold, it snowed right, it was snow forest and hail and rain, but and some ventures had to be abandoned. It was such a wintry blast. But we're going to have that on display in Hobart at the Long Gallery in a few months' time, and no doubt there'll be some stunning pictures. By artistry, we mean musicians, potters, people working with fabrics, as well as painters and illustrators and so on, the whole works. And that brings to life the soul relationship that we human beings have with nature. Again, as Gaudi said, all human creativity comes from the great book of nature, and this is it, writ large. We're nurturing the hope, Hilary, that we'll be able to bring this or future. They're fabulous displays of art when they're brought together to Melbourne, because the fate of the Tarkina rainforest is in the hands of this nation. It's not in the hands of a few people who want to log or mine down there. It's in the fate of the nation. And to be able to invigorate this inherent love we have for nature and the hope it'll be protected into action, you've got to show people how it is. And there's no better way than through the eye of the artist. So hopefully that'll also come to Melbourne. It'll complement, if not right up against, the fabulous artistry that there is in this museum that I've seen today. It's just superb, and what a voice for saving nature that is, just showing it as it is. And Peter's picture was incredibly important, and we know from since then we've got all sorts of new technological wizardry. The Giants film's a testament to that, and we do our best to let everybody, in the comfort of their homes, see what we see when we go into those living, remarkable rainforests in northwest Tasmania or in natural environments wherever they may be.
Well, and now we've got social media, so you're not reliant on someone running it on the front page. You can disseminate those images far and wide, which is a very hopeful thing, I think, in certain circumstances. But I wanted to ask you, Kevin, about the fact that, you know, some wilderness areas seem much more kind of charismatic and popular than others. And you were telling me some little tidbits about the Little Desert in Victoria, which is not, you know, a hugely sung place, but it's important, isn't it?
Well, it's important. I mean, the Little Desert was the beginning of the kind of wildlife and national parks movement in Victoria. As far as I'm not a historian of national parks of Victoria, but this is my understanding as an immigrant, and that, you know, our own state wilderness warrior, Peter Menkhorst, and others really got their start working in the Little Desert and campaigning to protect this national park. And then that led to us, the Land Conservation Council, then doing surveys in Alpine National Park. And the museum and our staff were all intimately involved in that before my time. I was 2 years old in 1977. And we did try to protect the places that had the most unique diversity. I'll confess, I haven't spent a lot of time in Little Desert. I've been there once myself. I think the Mallee is beautiful and grasslands are beautiful. Jane Melville, who's our curator for herpetology here, has done an immense amount of work in the Little Desert looking at fire impacts. We've been analyzing data. Just before this talk, I was flipping through the images from the cameras from the Little Desert and the Big Desert from this year. I have 3 million images to get through if anyone wants to help. Those are revealing where we have centers of diversity in there. So,
but it's interesting, isn't it, how, you know, the public perceptions of a place can shape how easy it is to get people excited about protecting it. You know, an image of a rainforest is a very powerful thing, as Peter Dombrovskis' image showed, but an image of a malleefowl mound might not be so powerful unless the right information is there too.
Yeah, I mean, if you see a malleefowl, it's wonderful. If you see red-tailed cockatoo, both of which are key species that are part of the National Management Plan in the Wimmera. I mean, the Wimmera as a whole is a very challenging place because it's, my colleague who's from there, he said there's more tree cover in Melbourne than there is in the Wimmera. And so, you know, it's being dominated by row cropping. It's the largest concentration of row cropping in Victoria, and you have pasture lands converting to row cropping, and pasture lands provide some habitat for insects and other species that row crops don't. But it's also a place where we're trying to create connectivity of landscapes, connecting the Grampians Garroward to the Little Desert, and the Little Desert to the Big Desert, and to the Murray Sunset. And there are all these kind of ideas and plans in place, and actually all habitat restoration in Victoria happens on private land, and about 80% of native vegetation, remnant vegetation in the Wimmera is in private hands. And so places like Bush Heritage, our private national park system, and Trust for Nature and others are doing all kinds of work to recover that vegetation habitat. And projects that we're looking to support them with the data we have from the species we can monitor.
People are asking, you know, what are some of the success stories that you're seeing? Where is work being done that's having an impact? That sounds like one of them. Do others spring to mind?
I mean, the success story is that life finds a way, to quote Jurassic Park, and that life is still here. The success story is that I think life is more resilient than maybe we give it credit. I wholeheartedly agree with Bob that we should be putting environments before economies, and we need to leave a legacy of these living environments. But I'm very confident that they will be here. I think people get caught up in the environmental crisis, and sometimes people talk about the planet dying. Well, the planet's not dying, at least not for another 600 million years, when the sun will, break up our carbon cycle, and expanding luminosity of the sun will devour all life on Earth. But we have 600 million years to crack it. We've, if life's going to live to be 100, life's about 80 years old right now. So we have, we've got some time to work on it. But I think life will be there. Weather will be as rich and wonderful and wondrous as like the rainforest that Bob and I have had the privilege to visit and work in and study and be inspired by. That's something really we don't know. And how are you going to grapple with the fact that we share this planet with 10 million species. How are we going to care for all of them? But what gives me hope is the power of images and the power of the human species to be compassionate and care about something that they will have never visited and will never visit. I think we're really exceptional and unique among species in that ability to care for something that isn't just for us.
I think, everyone in this room is very keen to see those goals come to pass. But some canny character has asked, how can we talk to people who are not as on side as we all are with this project? What are some ways we can have those conversations, Bob?
Like Donald Trump. Well, you can't. You have to go around them, and we have to replace them. I'm afraid that lack of empathy in the bullies who are running so much of the world at the moment is not talkable to. And it is, I've learned in my long life that going cap in hand to try to talk them around doesn't work. They have to be replaced. I have in a book I wrote recently a quote from the wonderful poet and musician Jimi Hendrix, who died at 27, but before that he said, there's some evil folks around and they want you to be nice and they want you to be sweet and they want you to be polite so that they can spread you out like jello. Now, we have to take that aboard. We have to understand that when somebody at the age of President Trump's got a drill baby drill mentality and is opening national parks that so many wonderful human beings have put so much into protecting for so long, that you can't argue that person around. They have to be replaced. And here we have in Australia, as I say, 80% of people want an end to native forest logging. Well, let's vote for people who want an end to native forest logging. And so on. And empathy and sympathy has to come with action. And my injunction to all the young folk who keep coming up to me and saying it's such a terrible pity, why aren't you angry and so on? Well, I've been through that. A couple of a decade or two depressed, but we have to get beyond that. We have to look after the people who are out there on the front lines defying what's going. Last year 250 environmentalists around this planet were murdered. Now we have to take a stand, at least in empathy with them, not try to be empathetic with those people who are creating the destruction. And this is an absolute critical question hanging over humanity at the moment. Will that compassionate component win out over the exploitative component? And all I can say is to us compassionate people, you have to look the bully in the eye and not back off. And when they bring in rules to say, we're going to criminalise you for peacefully protecting nature, well, let them. I have to also say, Hilary, that jail's not such a bad place. It's great for writing books. It doesn't hurt. We're here in Australia. I've found that people who've been to boarding school do better in jail than other folk. And sometimes the company there is not as bad as I found it in some places in Parliament. So, we get too serious about these things sometimes, but the thing that's really serious is the rapid loss of nature and this magnificent panoply of life on this planet. And putting a foot out and getting involved in that, in my experience, everybody comes back saying, I'm so glad I do that. And of course, if you can't go to sit in front of a bulldozer, and most people can't reasonably, you can support those who do. And that's a great, and I shouldn't say this in public, but some of the organisations doing that are tax deductible. So you get the government to give a little bit of money instead of into nuclear submarines into protecting the environment. So, it's a win-win.
I'm going to finish up tonight with, yes. With another very good question. I'm going to outsource this next time to you guys. What do you think is the most single urgent action Australia needs to take right now to genuinely protect its natural ecosystems? Kevin, can I get your thoughts on that, and then I'll go to Bob?
Well,
What would you like to see happen?
Yeah, stop cutting down habitat. Yeah, stop logging forests.
Full stop. Great. Okay, Bob?
I agree with that, but also in the Second World War, within 3 months of war being declared, we converted 15% of our economy into the war effort. Well, if the world was to convert 3 to 5% of its economy, we'd stop climate change in its tracks now. So it's not beyond us. It's well within our ability to do it. We've just got to get the people in there who are going to do it. And this planet's got a fantastic future ahead, not just for humanity, but for our fellow species.
This is an interesting question too that I'm going to squeeze in. In Australia, how much rainforest is left to save? How do we prioritise?
Well, we don't prioritise. We've got to protect the lot of what's left. Most of Australia's forests are gone. And that's particularly the case for woodlands. But everything's connected. And grasslands worse still. And our oceans are being marauded. Look at the krill fishing in Antarctica at the moment, robbing krill out of the mouths of whales and penguins and seals when the krill populations are declining, so that we can improve our skin well-being. Well, I'd rather have the wrinkles. But we've really got to just use our common sense. But Hillary, the old story, all the world needs for evil to flourish is for good people to do nothing. So we've all got to do in our own way, without getting too anxious about it. And while we still have fun, we've all got to do our bit, the best we can, to put an end to this marauding of nature, which is going on at the greatest rate in history, even after we've lost more of our forests, all varieties of forests, including rainforests, in history. And if Australia can't protect the Tarkina rainforest, how can we expect the Amazon or the Sulawesi forest to be protected? Come on, Albo. Come on, you folk who can stop this tomorrow. Put an end to this needless destruction and open it up to the job creative economic alternative. Put it back in the hands of the Palawa people so that they can show generations to come the wonder of this forest intact, not another desert.
I did not think that we would have a conversation that traversed Gaudi, Donald Trump and Jurassic Park tonight, but I'm very glad we did. A huge thank you to Museums Victoria for putting this on. A huge thank you to you, Kevin Rowe, and you, Bob Brown. The digital immersive exhibition of the Giants documentary is on for the next 3 months here at the museums. Thank you for coming along to celebrate our Wondrous Planet.